This week on a special Hall of Fame edition of NHRA Today. A visit to the third annual induction ceremonies of the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. A look back at the contributions to the sport from the 1993 inductees. And conversations with some of the great living legends of drag racing. From Gainesville, Florida, these stories and more on this edition of NHRA Today. Over the course of 4 decades, many great names have played an important part in making drag racing the grand sport that it is today. And in the last 2 years, we have saluted just 40 of the sport's famed legends. Names like Arfons, Black, Chrisman, Hart, Ivo, and Nicholson have joined a select group that only honors its best. Today, 10 more names will be included in the most cherished place in drag racing, the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. Hello everyone, I'm Steve Evans. The third annual International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction ceremonies are just about to get underway. And I can tell you, as one of the 5 selectors, it is one of the most difficult jobs in sports. Of the hundreds of possibilities, the narrowing down process gets, well, pretty tense. Joining me on that board of selectors are Wally Parks, founder and chairman of the board of NHRA, Dr. Robert Post, curator, National Museum of American History, Ted Jones, retired president of IHRA, and Harry Hibbler, publisher of Hot Rod magazine, who joins me now. Well, actually, this year there was a new selection process in place, and Harry Hibbler, I know, at least for me, it made it a little easier. I felt fairer as well.
Oh, a lot nicer, a lot easier for all of us because, you know, in the past we selected, each selector selected names and put them in, and that was the way it happened. This year, everybody selected names, put them in a hat, we drew them, and everybody voted on them. And you got to vote on some people that you might have forgotten or might have slipped your mind, you know?
And we didn't all agree on each other's picks, but it works out in the long run.
Well, and in the long run, there were some names came out of there that I was really happy to see on there that I would not have thought of. So I think it's perfect.
Enjoy the evening.
Thank you. You too.
When Jim Frizzell isn't working on NHRA's famed safety safari, he's probably collecting some kind of drag racing memorabilia. For every Hall of Fame induction ceremony, Jim has provided a lot of everlasting mementos of drag racing's past, bringing out old pictures, papers, magazines, and cards for everyone to see.
It's a love of mine because they're my heroes, and it gives me a chance to give back to them something that they've given me over the years. The inductees come to me and they'll look at something with tears in their eyes saying, I don't remember this article, I don't remember seeing this, you know. And the other thing is that we also do it, I do it more so now for the young kids that don't remember.
Joining me right now is a man that all of you should recognize, Big Daddy Don Garlitz, who is the father, really, of the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. As proud as you are of this evening in the Hall of Fame, there's something down the road in Ocala, Florida, that you're extremely proud of.
Well, that's right, Steve. The Museum of Drag Racing, you know, that was my wife and I's brainchild back in 1976, and we opened it in Seffner, and it didn't do too well. We moved it to Ocala, and it was a great success. But, you know, a lot of people kept calling it the Hall of Fame. And so we decided a few years ago that we really should have a Drag Racing Hall of Fame. There wasn't one, and I think it really complements the museum. There you see the cars and see the performances that they did in the past, but this is the people.
Even if you've been to the museum a few years ago, you should go back. It's changed a lot.
Oh, it's constantly changing, and a lot of people say that. They say, gosh, it's so different than it was a couple of years ago. And it is different than even last year, and we've got some big plans for the future in store.
Open every day and right off the freeway in Central Florida.
Only closed on Christmas.
Now, the site of this year's festivities, same as last year, the Grand Ballroom of the Gainesville Hilton. And like last year's gala, there were many present and past drag racing greats on hand. For the first time, a video screen was used so historic pictures and films could be shown to the audience during the presentations. And sadly, Dave McClellan, 3 of our inductees tonight are no longer with us. And it seems like only yesterday that Joe Paisano was out there thrashing on that funny car.
And you know, I can remember the days of Jungle Jim Lieberman with Jungle Pam out directing traffic, and Lieberman was coming back at what seemed to be 60 miles an hour after a burnout, and John Bandemere Sr. trying to carve a mountain into a drag strip and was ultimately successful.
With that said, let's take a closer look at the professional lives of the 3 gentlemen we just mentioned.
It would be easy to say that John Bandemere Sr. was ahead of his time. Case in point, the first NHRA national event at Great Bend, Kansas. When most race cars were driven or flat-towed, John showed up with his racer in a tractor-trailer rig, a good 30 years before it became standard equipment on professional race teams. As an innovative builder and racer, he built the first aluminum V8 valve covers, raced and built one of history's first four-wheel drive race cars, too. John was a strong advocate of youth safety education. When he built his own drag strip west of Denver, Colorado, he named it Bandemere Safety Park. He later acquired a large piece of property near Morrison, Colorado, where he took a mountainside and turned it into one of drag racing's finest showplaces, Bandemere Speedway, home of the Mopar Parts Mile High Nationals. Accepting the honor for the late John Bandemere Sr. were his sons and daughter. Probably one of the greatest showmen in drag racing history was Jungle Jim Lieberman. Jim started out in a variety of other drag cars, but gained national recognition as a funny car racer. He picked up the Jungle Jim name from a radio spot and decided to keep it because so many people had trouble pronouncing his last name. Known for his wild antics on and off the track, Jim brought true showmanship to drag racing. In addition to maintaining a sharp-looking rig, Jim also introduced fans to Jungle Pam, who was as much a part of his act as the car. Jungle Jim was one of the original professional match racers, touring the country's small tracks, putting on shows for crowds who didn't have the opportunity to attend a big national event. He would compete as often as 4 times a week, using 2 cars touring the country. But he also won the NHRA Summer Nationals in 1975, among other major events. Accepting for the late Jungle Jim Lieberman was his brother, Pam Hardy, and his son.
I like to thank all the racers, all the mechanics, everybody who knew my dad that had taken a minute with me to fill me in a piece of life of my father. I'd really like to thank you.
The son of Italian immigrants, Joe Pisano overcame the harsh realities of being homeless as a teenager to become a successful automotive parts manufacturer and funny car owner. Joe began his racing career in the late 50s with some of the quickest coupes in the country. Always looking to improve his own performance, he developed the JP1 block that powered his funny car through the 280 and 285 mile-an-hour speed barriers. It was also used by Eddie Hill's top fueler when he eclipsed the 4-second mark in 1988. One of the most likable figures to ever be involved in the sport, Joe always had the time to help his fellow racers with parts, advice, or even just a word of encouragement. Joe approached racing as a pastime rather than a profession.
Yes, it is a hobby because it's not a profession for me, and the people that help me, we just have a good time, and Gary Slusher has been a friend of mine for the last 25 years, so him and I and my brother Frankie just kind of hang out together and do it as a fun.
Accepting the Hall of Fame award for the late Joe Pisano was his brother Carmen.
And now with more on Joe Pisano, here's Frank Hawley's Fast Fact.
Joe Pisano was certainly a legend in the sport of NHRA drag racing. He made his mark years ago by campaigning some of the fastest and most beautiful funny cars this sport has ever seen. Of course, Joe owned Vinolia Piston Company that was responsible for making a lot of the connecting rods and pistons the racers used. One of Joe's more successful products was this JP1 aluminum block that he designed back in 1984. It was designed after a Chrysler Hemi engine. Now, there were already aluminum blocks that existed, but Joe took what was currently used and improved it. One of the things he did was the oil system that goes down the side of the block, he moved it higher in the block. That way, if a connecting rod failed and put a hole in this area of the block, it wouldn't get into the oil system. It was much easier to repair. Another thing Joe did was install larger main caps and more aluminum in the crankshaft area to make it much stronger. They had more aluminum up in the camshaft area. Everything was designed to improve over what was currently being used. Now in the future, a JP2 block is in the works. But this was very successful because it's still being used today. Just
Welcome back to NHRA Today. You know, the Hall of Fame class of '93, all 10 inductees come from dramatically different backgrounds. Now, with the help of Dave McClellan, let's take a look at the contributions those with us tonight have made to the sport of drag racing.
Lou Baney has to be considered one of the most diverse of the 1993 inductees. As a driver, Lou cut his teeth in roadsters on Southern California ovals, and on the dry lakes, he broke numerous records for coupes. As a promoter, he and Louis Center opened up Saugus Drag Strip back in 1950. It was the first track to offer night racing. As a team owner, he played an important role in the careers of Don Prudhomme, Tom McEwen, and Kenny Arnold. Baney also served as general manager of Drag News and the executive director of SEMA. Lou retired in the late 70s and continues to live in California. Due to health reasons, Lou was unable to attend, but his former driver, Tom McEwen, accepted the honor for him. When Bruce Crowder moved to California in 1950, he went to work as a machinist for 1991 Drag Racing Hall of Famer Paul Schieffer. Crowder began making his mark by manufacturing and marketing UFAB manifolds for Hemis, which became famous for powering another Hall of Famer, Emery Cook, to record runs. As his business grew, Bruce moved into clutches, adapting an Italian design of dual discs and a floater to top fuelers. From there, Crowder expanded again, adding his own lines of crankshafts, flywheels, and other racing components. Today, Bruce still has some racing interest with a Bonneville Streamliner. Being confined to a wheelchair never slowed Chet Herbert for a second. Just ask his competitors. He created a double-engine Harley-Davidson known as the Beast that ruled Bonneville and the first season of drag racing. Because of the Beast, it was widely believed in the 50s that motorcycles would always be faster and quicker than cars in the quarter mile. When that was proven wrong, Herbert simply switched to dual-engine slingshots. Chet was particularly successful with unorthodox combinations, adapting Harley-Davidson roller technology to cars and twin unblown Chevys running on gas. Today, Herbert Cams has become a major warehouse operation, and its owner preoccupied with building a Bonneville Streamliner that will challenge the world speed record. Doris Herbert is the first journalist to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. She was considered the most influential female in drag racing during the 1960s. When her brother Chet Herbert bought Drag News in 1959, he turned it over to Doris. The paper was bi-weekly and sold mostly in California, but Doris made it into a weekly with a national circulation. Drag News was considered the voice of drag racing in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Many of the sport's best-known editors, reporters, and photographers credit Drag News with launching their careers. Today, Doris has a successful marketing company based in Huntington Beach, California. Top Fuel racer Doug Herbert accepted the award for his aunt. Some people have called Ed Iskandarian hot rodding's cam-grinding P.T. Barnum. Blessed with a promotional flair that matched his mechanical skills, Ed started Iskandarian Racing Cams after he got out of the service, about the same time that hot rodding became so popular. Within 3 years, the Isky 404 was the most famous flathead cam of its time by using ad space in Hot Rod magazine to publicize its wins. Isky was responsible for many marketing innovations that are still used today, such as paying contingency money and promotional T-shirts. In 1963, he was elected the first president of SEMA. Today, Ed is retired, but his firm remains a major force in racing. Accepting the plaque for Ed Iskandarian was engine builder and friend Nick Arias. Known to some as Mr. Chevrolet, but to most people as Grumpy, Bill Jenkins has become a pro stock legend. After building winning six-cylinder and V8 Chevys, Bill climbed behind the wheel himself in 1965. Grumpy's Chevys upset the dominant Dodge and Plymouth Hemis in A stock. Jenkins pioneered small stock power plants, McPherson strut suspension, tube frames, and dry sump oiling for pro stockers. Though he doesn't drive anymore, Jenkins' performance cars can be credited with 6 points championships, 36 NHRA national event wins, and 20 Carcraft All-Star team selections. Bill Grumpy Jenkins is still going strong today with no signs of ever slowing down. Probably one of the most influential people to ever walk through a racetrack's gate is Ralph Seagraves. As special events director at R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, he personally persuaded the company's president to bring the Winston brand to motorsports. The rest is history. Today, NASCAR and NHRA racing have become synonymous with Winston. The postseason points funds weren't the only thing that Ralph helped establish. He worked with corporate leaders, both inside and outside of RJR, helping secure the credibility of racing. During his tenure, Seagraves has convinced no fewer than 13 different RJR CEOs to continue funding Winston's generous motorsports programs.
Our association has been successful because of the efforts of the NHRA staff and the acceptance and support from other sponsors, drivers, and most of all, the great support of the fans. This total package is what has made NHRA drag racing one of the most successful ventures in all of motorsports.
Even though he has never won a round or set a record, Ralph Seagraves' contributions to drag racing have made a lasting impression on everyone who races or watches our sport.
As we've seen here on NHRA Today, drag racing exists in more places around the world than ever before. Under the leadership of NHRA Vice President of International Relations, Carl Olson, NHRA has established formal relations with 29 countries. Recently, Olson and the president of the international sanctioning body, FISA, Max Mosley, who attended last season's U.S. Nationals, met to discuss the development of drag racing around the world. Now, those preliminary talks have led to the creation of a FISA commission that will provide a framework for international drag racing competition and a standardization of the rules. The commission will be approved at the next meeting June 8th and will be made up of representatives from 9 countries. Anytime you get a big room full of racers like this and history starts recounting itself, emotions are bound to run high. Earlier, I had a chance to talk to some of tonight's inductees.
I lucked out. I won a lot of races. My big gig was to make the stuff run, really, and I really didn't care who won. And maybe it was a matter of expediting things and I paid for the bar and so forth and so on. And it's been a good life, and I never took it seriously, which is a very important factor.
Well, I'm not as active as I'd like to be, but we've got some projects going. The Bonneville car, and some drag cars, but this high-dollar racing, this top fuel racing, I got to leave that to Doug.
It feels like the Olympic champion that just won 5 gold medals. That's the way I feel. And the president, when they said, "You as elected president."
A lot of special friends in this room for you.
Tremendous amount. A lot of history, a lot of friends, a lot of support from all the manufacturers, the athletes, the promoters, and especially NHRA.
I said, I'm too young for all this, but I'm quite pleased.
But you're still very much a contemporary in this sport.
I really am. I'm following it at arm's length right now, and I might get back into it. I've got some ideas. I think that maybe something might happen.
NHRA Today is a presentation of Diamond P Sport.